Good afternoon. House Government Operations Military Affairs Committee is meeting one last time this week to take some further testimony on S-96. This is an act related to privatization contracts. Mr. Sagel is here and we have draft 2.1 up on our webpage. And Rick, if you could give us a quick breeze through what's different from this from the Senate as passed. Last time we looked at this, we had both the Senate GovOps version and we looked at the Senate as passed. And this in the section 1 and 2 now, I think it's more the version that the Senate GovOps passed as something we can talk about and get some testimony. So
yeah, thank you. So Rick Sagel, Office of Legislative Counsel. So you should have draft 2.1 of S-96. And as the chair said, this is kind of don't call it a Frankenstein, but kind of a combination of what passed Senate GovOps and then what eventually passed the Senate floor. What passed the Senate floor was basically a study looking at these privatized contracts, seeing what effect a 20% cost savings would have on these contracts, including grants as privatized contracts. So we've taken some of that and put it into this draft. We've also taken some of what was in the original Senate GovOps version and put it into this draft. So I'll start with section 1, which is just this one definition. So this definition was amended in the Senate GovOps version. The one change that we have made here is in the Senate GovOps version. You can read on line 10, privatization contract means a contract for services. The previous version said contract or grant. So we're going to put that into the study. I'll come back to that in a little bit because that could have quite an effect on what this type of arrangement is. I'm going to read on here. Contract for services valued at $25,000 or more per year, which is the same or substantially similar to and in lieu of services previously provided in whole or in part by permanent classified state employees. So you can keep reading on. That is what is currently in statute. And the version that passed Senate GovOps also had this part removed. And in this draft, it's also removed. So what this would do is widen the scope of what a privatized contract is. I think there's only one or two the state currently has. So if you were to change the definition, you would inherently widen the scope, perhaps bring in more contracts into this definition of what a privatized contract is, if that makes sense. Because currently, a privatized contract must result in a reduction of force of at least one permanent classified employee or the elimination of a vacant position of an employee covered by a CBA. So that would be removed. That requirement would be removed.
Question from Representative Hooper.
Well, not a question so much as in my experience, that's the door that is 15 feet wider than you imagine it is when you listen to the actual language and what goes on. That's the door that needs to be narrowed and closed.
The requirement that in order to be considered a privatized contract, that there be
Either have to
official
get rid of a position or get rid of a person.
So section 1, I'll get to this. This would take effect July 1st, 2025. And that is up for debate. But I thought that would be a reasonable time for the administration to kind of come up with the ways to address this change if it does pass. Section 2, starting on line 16, this section 342, this actually passed the Senate floor. And when we looked at this language in Senate GovOps, you'll see on line 20, the word spirit and is crossed out. I read this and I thought this doesn't make much sense. How do you know what a spirit of something is? So the committee agreed to remove that term spirit. It's hard to legally define what spirit is. So that's been removed on line 20 and on page 2 also removed on line 1. So nothing really substantive there, just kind of a clearing up language. Now starting on line 7, section 343, this is language that came out of the Senate Government Operations Committee. This is your procedure for entering into a privatized contract. There currently is this 35-day process that the agency must enter into. Again, currently in statute where they must have give notice to the collective bargaining organization that there's an intent to privatize something in state government. What this bill would do, line 19, subdivision B, is during this 35-day period, the agency shall prepare a specific written statement of the services proposed to be the subject of the privatization contract, including the specific quantity and standard of quality of the subject services. For each position in which a bidder will employ any person pursuant to a privatization contract and for which the duties are substantially similar to the duties performed by a permanent classified state employee, the statement shall also include the prevailing wage rate to be paid for each position, which shall not be less than the average step of the grade under which the comparable state employee position is paid. The statement shall be provided to the collective bargaining representative, the agency administration, and be posted where it's viewable to the public. The statement shall be subject to the Public Records Act. Okay, line 11, every bid shall include the wage rate for each position, which shall not be less than the prevailing wage rate contained in the previous statement. Whether health, dental, and vision insurance coverage is provided to employees, and if applicable, the cost to employees. The agency and the Secretary of Administration shall each certify in writing that they have complied with all provisions of this section and with all other applicable laws. Page 4, the quality of the services to be provided by the designated bidder is likely to satisfy the quality requirements of the statement prepared pursuant to subdivision 1 of the subsection. The designated bidder and its supervisory employees, while in the employ of the designated bidder, have no record of substantial or repeated willful noncompliance with any relevant federal or state regulatory statute, including statutes concerning labor relations, occupational safety and health, non-discrimination and affirmative action, environmental protection, and conflicts of interest. D, the proposed privatization contract is in the public interest in that it meets the applicable quality and fiscal standards set forth in the section. Okay, line 12, subsection B, each privatization contract shall include the wage rate for each position. So previously, if this is going to sound repetitive, the previous subsection was each bid must include. Now we're detailing what each contract must include. The wage rate for each position, which shall not be less than the prevailing wage rate contained in the statement in subdivision A1. A provision that the cost and coverage of the health, dental, and vision insurance provided to employees is substantially similar to the cost and coverage of the health, dental, and vision insurance provided to state employees. A provision that the contractor shall submit quarterly payroll records to the agency, which lists the hours worked and the hourly wage paid for each employee in the previous quarter. A provision that the agency shall not amend any privatization contract if the amendment has the purpose or effect of avoiding any requirement of the section. A provision requiring the contractor to comply with a policy of non-discrimination and equal opportunity for all persons and to take affirmative steps to provide such equal opportunity for all persons. A provision granting all employees employed under the contract just cause employment protection. And a provision requiring the contractor to comply with a policy of whistleblower protection equal to those defined in sections 971, 978 of this title. Okay. On page 6, line 6, line 5 and 6, the auditor shall review the privatization contract along with employer payroll and benefits records, ensuring the auditor has access to those things if they're a contractor.
And that's in addition to the existing things that an auditor looks at when
Correct.
evaluating privatization contract.
Correct. Yeah, this is just having to do with contracts. Subdivision 2 on 911, these are just updates, except the very last line on 18 and 19 of that section. The agency shall not renew the privatization contract, and that replaces review whether to renew. So this bill would require the agency not be able to renew the contract if the auditor provides information that they have not achieved the cost savings as required in this title, 10% currently. Okay, section 3. This is the study that was in the Senate version that passed. A little bit of a change though. The agency administration, in consultation with JFO, the state auditor, the SCA, and the Office of Attorney General, shall assess the fiscal and operational impacts of modifying the definition of privatization contracts to include grants. I mentioned that earlier. 2, increasing the required cost savings of a privatization contract from 10% to 20%. That was in the original language that passed Senate GovOps. We'd want to know what kind of have. 3, removing exceptions set forth in 3 VSA 342 that after review are used excessively or arbitrarily to certify contracts by the Office of Attorney General. Again, that was in the Senate version. The agency shall submit a written report to this committee and the Senate Committee of Ops on or before February 1st, 2025. So everything except section 1 takes effect on passage. The section that redefines privatization contract takes effect July 1st, 2025.
This is good. I mean, quite frankly, the scale has on one side of it corporations that come in, throw a low ball out, bring people in to do work or telephone it out. On the other side of the scale is Vermonters who have a career here and know what's going on. The potential for privatization is minimized by this and only can happen if there's a real savings presented and verified to Vermonters. So this is good language.
We'll probably end up doing a committee discussion on what our path is forward on Monday. But I wanted to at least get the testimony on the table here. So does anybody have any questions about the words on the page right now? For us to go on to testimony and then we can have you back up, Rick, when we get back to this on Monday. Great, thank you for walking us through this. I'd like to invite Joyce to join us. I know we borrowed you probably away from budget crunch time, so thank you for accommodating us.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I know you've all had a long day already, so my job is to let you know that the Joint Fiscal Office has lots of questions about how we would look at the cost to the state of this bill. The first thing to know is that there is no central point for collecting information about contracts. So in order for us to look at the cost of adopting this bill, we would have to call or contact every department, agency, designated agencies, special services agency, et cetera, and ask them about their contracts. So that creates a challenge for us. My second question is, this bill requires that a contract pay prevailing wage, which remember is the average of the steps, the range where state employees are currently doing the job. So I'm thinking in my head as an economist, okay, what's the value added of a new college graduate as a case manager versus a person who has 30 years experience as a case manager? Yet the college graduate would have to be paid the average level of all the positions, all the rankings of people who are currently providing that services. So I'm not sure about the wisdom of that provision. Thirdly, it's really tough to determine the prevailing wage. There is, again, no information point. We would have to contact agencies to find out what are the ranges of folks who are providing a certain service, and then take the midpoint of that range.
Do you want to finish your points before we, okay, Representative Rowe, you go ahead.
Sure. I know that federal contracts set prevailing wage. Can we tie into that?
I don't know. Maybe Ledge Council knows more
I
about
just know
that.
from my own experience that when I worked landscaping, we loved when we got federal contracts, because then we got paid usually twice as much as we usually did.
Did you work twice as hard?
Well, I'd like to say we always worked hard.
Okay. Okay, so the prevailing wage is a real question in my mind. there used to be a provision in this bill that if there was no similar state employee providing a service that was now to be contracted out, that you could instead look at the private sector for people who are doing similar kinds of research or investigation or service or whatever. Is that still in the bill? No. No. Okay, so then that's another question. If there is nobody in state government who is doing a certain service, how would we establish a prevailing wage? So for example, in my office, we often contract out a super technical modeling job. This was true with climate change bills in recent months. There's nobody in state government who can do that kind of very technical modeling. So how would we determine the wage to be paid?
Just, I'm a little confused by that last piece. So as I understand the existing privatization statute, we've removed the reduction in force language in this current draft, but it's still, in order to be subject to a privatization contract review, that process, it still has to be a contract for services that are the same or substantially similar to, and in lieu of services previously provided in whole or in part by permanent state classified employees. So a new service that was something completely
Not
different
subject to
wouldn't be
this.
subject to this
Okay.
at all.
All right, that's good.
Am I understanding that right, Rick?
Under that example, yes, you're correct.
Okay, I stand correct. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think it also went into like specialized.
Yeah, and I am interested in hearing feedback on, so there is that provision that was in the Senate GovOps as passed, that Rick went over around, not allowing the flexibility that's in, the 342. Is that?
Well, can I ask another question later?
Yeah, the exceptions, and those exceptions have to do with like specialized services and what.
Just, contract services, which are a majority of what the state contracts for. Rare is it a privatized contract, it's usually a contract for services. And there are many ways for the state to certify a contract for service. And the Senate GovOps committee was curious about those exceptions.
Yeah, so in that part, this is on page 7. The agency of administration shall assess the fiscal and operational impacts of removing exceptions set forth. So this bill, does it remove those exceptions the way that this draft is up in? Or is that just one of the things that the study?
It's one of the things to study.
It's in the
The
study.
Senate GovOps didn't remove any exceptions either. It
Okay.
just same language that it's gonna review those exceptions.
Thank you. Just want to make sure what's in the study versus what's actually, what we're actually thinking about doing in this draft.
You say you would have to go to each department, agency and compile the information. Doesn't the Secretary of Administration have the obligation to at least approve contracts like this before they're put out?
I talked with them and they said there is no collection spot for all the contracts and grants, if you think about grants in the study.
Mhm.
Right, so they would have to engage in this big data gathering operation if this study were to go through as well.
I think somebody would have to like be responsible for paying the bills.
It's every department
Yeah.
that issues a contract, yeah. Yeah, so, yes, so I have looked at the cost to the state if under this bill, contracts had to pay the prevailing wage plus health insurance, and it's comparable health insurance to what state employees have. And currently, the threshold is 10%. You have to save 10% over what the state pays to a comparable employee. Okay, so I looked at the Human Resources report on Vermont's state workforce, looked at the average wage and benefits paid to a state employee. And it would be relatively easy to satisfy even a 20% cost saving, paying prevailing wage and and provided health benefits. And the reason is that there are no pension benefits required, of course, and pension benefits make up a big share of compensation. So you've got the pension benefits, you've got employee assistance programs, annual leave, sick leave, not even thinking about the physical space and the IT services and all those other things that go into supporting a state employee. So moving from the 10% to the 20% would not, in my early opinion, would not be a big barrier to privatizing contracts. It seems relatively easy to satisfy that. When I talked to the sponsor of the bill, I was a bit surprised about this and thought that maybe, I'm sorry, she was a bit surprised and thought that maybe they should review the 20% threshold. So that's worth thinking about. And I'll also mention that if existing contracts were not renewed, because maybe they satisfied the 10%, they wouldn't satisfy the 20%, or maybe they don't satisfy some other provision in this revised bill, there could be a dip in state services. So we know that right now the state is having a lot of trouble hiring employees because we have a demographic challenge. There are fewer younger people. There are more older people retiring. There are lots and lots of retirements. I think you heard this from Human Resources a week or so ago. So if you can't hire at the private level and you can't find the state employees, what happens to the services? Yes, maybe the existing state employees work overtime, or maybe they rebel and they refuse to work overtime. But I do think there is an issue about what happens to state services. If you do succeed in hiring them at these prevailing wages plus health insurance, you need to think about what that means for cost, and that's where JFO is supposed to be estimating the cost. And I'm telling you that this is a big challenge. We certainly can't do it at this point, and there's a question as to how accurate we could be if we were asked to do it in the future. If instead there are more state employees, then of course that adds to payroll and that adds to future liabilities in terms of pension benefits, future health benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking now, and I'm happy to take any questions and yeah, see where this goes. Thank you.
Just, it seems really opaque to me whether we understand currently, the problem that as it was articulated, I think in the testimony we originally heard on this, in the initial couple of walkthroughs, was that we have a lot of vacancies in state government, and that the administration is able to basically just circumvent the privatization contract statute that exists today in most cases because it requires a formal reduction in force. So the fact that the state, can't hire some of these positions essentially means that the administration gets a pass to go ahead and give those positions to private contractors. And we don't really have any way to measure the cost benefit of that directly, right? Like we essentially are just trusting the administration that those people are those contract providers who we're hearing in some cases are working in the same job, essentially in the same role, providing the same service as a state employee, but for far less pay and benefits. If that, we don't know if what they're getting paid is really saving us money because of the way that the current system allows a circumvention of the privatization contract statute. That's the way that this was articulated to us as a problem. I'm wondering if, from a joint fiscal perspective, do we have any ability to really look into those contracts and say, is this really better than maybe even raising the wages of employees, paying this private contractor?
Right. So we don't have the data to look at that question. With a lot of work and a lot of personnel time, I suppose it would be possible to take a look. But as you know, JFO is a small operation. We have a number of summer studies already on the books, and this would be a lot of work. Now, currently, the study in the bill is a study by the Agency of Administration in consultation with JFO, so it's not all on our shoulders, but it would be AOA that is collecting the data and making a comparison. So it's a lot of work, and one first step might be to to establish a central location where we have information about contract and grants to enable a study in future years. But at the moment, it's a very tall task.
Uh, I'm wondering like why it's so hard to get this data, because I'm just thinking from like organizational perspective, if you're the administration. Presumably you have like a budget and then you know like how much you're paying all the employees that work for all the agencies, and that information has to, start with the budget and sort of like exist somewhere, that I would imagine. Otherwise, you couldn't really.
So I guess that's a question for the Agency of Administration, but when I talked with Sarah Clark, she confirmed that there's no information at their fingertips in terms of all the contracts and grants that are out there.
So the way this language reads, I'm thinking about the difference between doing full-blown deep dive studies versus and understanding every single contract that's all across state government and trying to come up, as opposed to looking at a few cases with the Agency of Administration and giving us an evaluation of what that looks like. If we could narrow what we were asking an analysis to happen on, as opposed to every single contract across state government for services, to more of a report back or something that wasn't quite as extensive, would it be more manageable for JFO to do something like what's contemplated in the study? Because it sounds like the real concern that you're expressing on behalf of JFO is this is a huge amount of work if we're expected to go out and get every single piece of data about every contract.
Right, and again, the burden is right now mostly on the Agency of Administration. We would be expected to consult with them and help them and so forth. Of course, the problem with selecting a few cases here and there is that you don't know if you're getting a representative sample, right, of all the contracts that are out there. So the credibility of the results might come into question. So that's the trade-off you face, right? It would be easier to do a select group of contracts, maybe look at 100 contracts. But the questions are they representative of all the contracts out there?
So
Well, as I said, when we had testimony on this before, the global world of people who have contracts with the state is not what we're sort of talking about here. We've always had nursing problems for the last 20, 30 years. It used to be addressed by a market factor, which raised nurses' salaries. That apparently it's not. I think that's still in effect, but it doesn't seem to be as effective. The Vets Home has way too many private duty nurses, and they each have a contract. So you could say they're doing that. It's more historically the cases of the world who would sit in Agency of Human Services and have a bevy of contractors doing programming and system maintenance right beside the state employees. That was an ongoing long-term contract that initially was kind of the focus of this stuff, not incidental positions, but broad stroke that has gotten more specific over time. But that's sort of where the problem came from. And that was based upon language that was changed about the width or the separations. So we keep the focus narrow, as I think the intention is to be, and maybe we'll hear testimony on that. It might be easier to
So you're
think.
saying that there's one contractor with many, many people working under one contract?
There have been, yeah. The example that I gave for information tech a long time ago when it was first starting to get very popular. And like even the Department of Labor, they had a system that only one person knew how to operate. And when that person was on vacation, you were in trouble. Those things, indicated areas where people were brought in that had the same level of experience and expertise that state employees did, as an option to not hire the state employees, which is kind of the thing that I thought we were trying to get around here in terms of providing Vermonters with a a quality year as opposed to a we need you today, we don't need you tomorrow scenario.
And I suppose part of the investigation for agency administration with JFO is to be sure that the folks who are hired have similar expertise and skills and so forth, and should be paid the average wage of the state employees, right? So again, you're looking at each individual, right, to evaluate their.
Yeah, in some of those circumstances, back to the IT again, you hire a contractor, you don't necessarily hire the individual.
Exactly, which makes it really hard to know.
You're getting what they decide to send you.
Yes, so how would we judge whether the quality is similar or not?
We hire them ourselves.
Well,
We can, yes.
and I think what we're looking at in this draft is language that would require the bidder to disclose a lot more about what are they paying and require them to pay have benefits that are comparable. I'm hearing what you're saying around the prevailing wage requirement, and I'd be interested to hear, you know, like we're going to hear from the State Employees Association next about is it about the prevailing wage regardless of experience, or if we sort of made it clear that people with similar experience you know, could get paid equivalently to what employees in a similar job do in these privatization contracts.
Well, in terms of
At
the
least resolve that concern.
In terms of the money too, keep in mind that if we're talking about an apple to apple comparison of compensation, albeit less retirement compensation, when you contract out, you also add a layer of profit and administrative costs that is on top of what the private company expects. So that's,
Unless their training and everything, if they have some magic sauce that's just so good that they can do a certain service better and still do it well at that savings. I mean, that's that seems to be the thing, right? Right.
but no beef. You're in using hamburger now.
We played that one all the way out. Anything else that you'd like to lay us on the table for us to think about over the weekend, Joyce?
I think I've presented you lots of questions. I will stop there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So many questions.
So many questions. A little bit.
Well, I'm going to be delving into the fiscal note too that you all prepared, which is more questions than I think money.
There are two fiscal notes. The first one from Senate Gov Ops raises lots of questions. It's not exactly relevant for you folks because some of those study questions were in the legislation. And then the second fiscal note is useless because it's all study. And I said, well, so there's no fiscal effect. It's all in the study. So, but yes, the first fiscal note has lots.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Howard, would you like to join us?
I understand it's more precarious to stand between the community and the media. I'll try to be brief as I can, and
That's what.
Yeah.
It's you.
and JFO did present a lot of questions, and I hope to present a lot of answers. I do think they are overcomplicating the situation, the bill. They're thinking a little bit too much about it, which is why we love JFO. For the record, I'm Steve Howard. I'm the executive director of the Vermont State Employees Association. And we have read the draft and strongly support the draft and urge you to adopt it. I think testimony of JFO, I think, is an indication of the need for this legislation. The experience of state employees is that privatization of state services is rampant. It's significant and it has a real impact on their work lives and on their collective bargaining agreement in their union. And the management, I think I agree with Representative Nugent, the management doesn't have any idea at all how big this problem is, and they really should. So I know it's a lot of work for the agency of administration, which will be carrying out this task. They have a large staff to do this. They have many resources to do this. JFO is consulting with them really to keep them honest, to make sure that they're not cooking the books, to downplay the problem, because our experience is that they do downplay the problem. So we just have JFO there to protect the legislative branch from from having a study presented to them that isn't authentic, which is pretty standard role for JFO to play. The issue of the prevailing wage, there's some confusion, I think, because people think of the federal prevailing wage, which is, I think, what Representative Marwicki was referring to. This is not federal prevailing wage. And in the original draft of the bill, prior to the Senate action, it referred to the wage as the minimum wage. And they thought prevailing would be more clear, which I think we're seeing it's not more clear.
So I guess I want to get clarity though on what we're talking about, because I think the idea that a private contractor that's doing substantively the same job as a state employee, the idea that we would require that they get paid the same makes sense. How we refer to that, I'm interested in what Ms. Manchester was saying about, okay, so if you say prevailing, then are you meaning the average wage of anybody that's in that classified job, regardless of what their experience is?
Yeah, I think it's the most important part that's in the language that's in there refers to the comparable employee in that particular position. So if you have you have the state employee here and the private sector employee there, the comparison is of two comparable employees who are doing that work. That's in the language that's in the bill now. That's why the fiscal note's a little curious, because this doesn't look at the average wage of state employees. It looks at the wages for the particular classification that is doing the same work as the private sector employee, and they have to be comparable employees. Same level of experience, same years of service, that kind of stuff. That's in the bill now. It's not a generic comparison of either state employees at large or just the whole class of state employees. It's employee A and employee B. How do those two comparable employees, those two comparable employees need to be paid the same? So if you have 10 years of experience and you have 10 years of experience, and you have this education and you have this education, you need to be paid the same. That's what this legislation says. I think you heard in my testimony earlier, I think last week maybe, that we would urge you to include the normal cost of pension benefits as an item that should be included in the comparison. That was an oversight on our part on the Senate side, and that the healthcare plan be set not just at the 80-20 comparable split, but it be set at a 90% actuarial value, so you're actually getting a comparable health plan to what state employees have. And the reason for that is because I think maybe you just said this, Mr. Chairman. If you have the secret sauce and you can figure out how to do something in the private sector better than state government without taking it out on your employees, we understand that private contract makes sense. And here we're only talking about private contracts that replace similar or work that's substantially similar or the same as employees in the bargaining unit. It's not all contracts. It's just that small group of contracts. So it's not a small group, but it's a limited group of contracts. So we would encourage you to include the benefits in that change in the healthcare. I think those are the points that I would like to make. I don't believe this is as complicated as what JFO is thinking. I think it's much more limited in scope, and their role is really just to check to make sure the administration, who should have been doing this all along, does this the right way, so that the legislature gets real information to make good decisions. And at least you'll see the scope of the problem. Our members see it every day, but you'll actually see the data that shows what it is.
Any other questions for Mr. Howard at this point? Representative Chase?
The two employees you gave an example of with similar education and experiences, they're like a performance modifier, like the state doesn't manufacture widgets, but if one manufactures 20 widgets per hour and the other manufactures 40, is there a performance modifier on the salary there?
Well,
TPS reports.
Yeah, I don't know. The answer is no. That's not part of something we contemplated. But the way the language is worded in the bill, it does look at like years of experience and because it's the average of it talks about the step level of the state employee, which is an indication of how long that state employee has been serving, but it doesn't talk about how job performance, that's an issue that we don't contemplate in this bill. Okay. We assume that the state has the highest performing employees and that the private sector would also have employees that would produce at least at that level, or the contract is not likely to be effective.
So I know most of the committee is probably feeling like I am, where our brains are turned to mush. And I do want a little bit of time to put together an agenda, which includes a little further testimony on this for Monday before we hit the floor. Hearing a couple of the notes, want to talk about that with Legislative Council, Mr. Howard, and some of the other stakeholders. We've got a couple of requests to testify, and I did want to tell the committee that I did ask the administration to come in and speak, and we'll try to get them in on Monday. Several of the folks from the agency administration just couldn't make it this afternoon, and of course, our schedule was so fluid. But I assured them I'd give them an opportunity to weigh in on this draft as well, so we'll do that on Monday. Anything else for us, Steve?
The only one thing I would say, and I'll end it at this, is that I also would say that the concern about the JFO raised about a dip in state services, the idea behind this legislation and this concern about the use of private contracts is to look at the overall competitiveness of the state's current benefits and current wage structure. It's our view that the use of private contractors weakens the bargaining unit, depresses wages, and shrinks benefits. And if the pressure to fill those positions is created, the administration is then put in a position where they have to start thinking about how to become competitive. That will fill the positions that are vacant now, and also move a lot of those private contracts, many of which are out of state, back to Vermont, filled by Vermonters in positions that we know pay livable wages with decent benefits.
Do you have any examples of those? The out-of-state ones, we heard about the prisons, but other examples?
Prison's a good example. So Mississippi is a good example. A number of the folks who are answering phones are answering phones from out of state. And in some cases, I believe like Department of Labor, they're literally just in economic services as well. They're literally just answering the phones so that the administration can say that it's not a 3-hour wait time. They don't know anything about the programs. They don't know anything. They can't help the people on the other end of the phone. It's just to say that somebody answered the phone. But they can't find, they're sending that to an out-of-state contract to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a nice weekend.
So we'll be back at 9:30 on Monday. So I will have a bunch of bills coming back to us with proposals of amendment. It's definitely look at the calendars. We will be able to take a vote on just the H88 as introduced, the Hartford Charter. I appreciate everybody making a little bit of time for the Bennington. I did talk with Representative Corcoran, and that it's more thorny than we had thought. So I'm
a lot of apple.
yeah. So I have put him in touch with Legislative Council to talk a little bit about unraveling the Town of Bennington Charter versus the weird statutory frame for the old Bennington Village, the highway authorization that happened in 1959. Whoever was in the seat in 1959, I'm going to find out. Because what they did to that village is not really, it was not a good process. They did not follow our process.
When will we know what the agenda is for Monday morning?
I will.
You said 30.
Yes, we're going to start with 888. So here's my plan. I'll tell you now, and then Andrea and I will talk about making this formal. We'll start with 888 to get that moving. Then I'd like to have some of the testimony on S96 after that. And then we'll have at least the Veterans Home Bill, Senate Proposal of Amendment, the H644 Senate Proposal of Amendment. And then if there are other things that the Senate's messaging now that I haven't even seen yet, we'll have a little bit of time to look at some of those. If we need more time to take testimony on things that have big changes, we'll just postpone action from the action calendar on Monday so that we have time on Tuesday to take up any of those. So it'll be a little bit fluid, but that's where we're starting.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you all